Welcome back to the Lockdown Blog. We're going to speak next to Peter Wood, who's very aptly named because one of the things we're going to talk about is Forest Church, and that's why I'm standing outside amongst the trees. So let's go and speak to Peter now.
So, Peter Wood, thank you so much for being willing to do this. And I see that you are somewhere sunny in Aberdeenshire by the look of things.
David, it's great to be with you, coming from sunny Stonehaven, the home of the Deep Fried Mars Bar and fabulous fish and chip shop. But I'm here at my mother's house, sitting in her garden, just able to have a chance to chat with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Now, because of the technology, we get a 40-minute window, and they may cut us off or may not.
That's pretty good for ministers, actually. That's a good discipline.
I found it very useful for session meetings.
Absolutely. Although people get quite a bit giddy looking at each other's bookshelves or hairstyles, with got to stick to the content. But there we go. Yeah.
Peter, I've got to know you recently, although Klaus Buert suggested I should chat to you for quite a long time, and I wondered if you'd share a little bit about your background in ministry first, and before we move on. My understanding is that you trained in the Church of Scotland, but you did spend quite a long time down south. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
That's correct, David. I felt called in the late 1980s into full-time Christian service, but at the same time had experience of working abroad. And so for the first few years in the 1990s, went and worked at a theological college in what became DR Congo. We came back from that, and because we'd been with Church Mission Society, friends said, look, if you're interested in new housing areas, as I was, because I'm really interested in working out what it means to be a Christian community. And so I felt going back to basics and starting again was what I wanted to do. And so for those reasons, friends, that I could have done, there's a job in East Kilbride that came up, but at the same time, there's a job in Cambridgeshire. And so that church, the houses were getting going at the same time, the church getting going at the same time the houses were being built. And that's really attractive to go in at that early stage and be formative and engage with partners at that point. And so, yes, for 13 years as a minister there, appointed by the churches together in Cambridgeshire. So I was a Baptist minister, as a Methodist minister, Anglican priest, URC minister, with the Roman Catholics in our building and the Indian Orthodox. It was fabulous. It was great. At the end of that, the Anglican bishop said, Peter, do you think you could come and do some of your new housing stuff with the diocese? Because Cambridgeshire was exploding with new housing. And so for the last 5 years, well, as the church does, David, as you know, when you take on one role, you find that it adds a few more hats to you. And you think, hold on. He said, would you be the director of mission? And that became not just new housing, but youth and children, Fresh Expressions, and I then built a team of people to work with us in Ely Diocese, with Fresh Expressions really being our main emphasis. But I started to link with Kigali as well, and we did some great appointments to work with the homeless. So a range of different mission resources that has taken me from the early days back in 1993 when Kincardine Deeside, in their ecumenical brilliance, decided to appoint me to work overseas.
So quite a route, and you're now back in Scotland, is that right?
That's correct. My wife teaches theology, and I knew that when a job at Edinburgh came up at the Centre for the Study of World Christianity, and teaching African Christianity, I mean, these are pretty rare jobs, and I knew if that was going to come up, she was going to go for it and be well placed for it. She just eliminated the field and did brilliantly, and that's her job. And so she got that job a couple of years ago, and I moved up with the family 6 months later, and I'm adjusting and rediscovering life in Scotland and with its joys and its challenges.
And that's included interim moderator work and things like that?
Yeah, I'm currently, I felt my calling has been to work with Christian community and encourage mission across the church and to find new places for mission. David, I think that at least 85% of the population struggle to conceive, get into their head the idea of crossing a church threshold. So we need to find new places for the gospel, new starting points for people in different places to present Jesus Christ. So that's why I did what I did, and I was keen to do the similar thing in the Lothians. And so I am not a parish minister.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need a variety of forms of ministry. I'd love to see more authorized and acknowledged and embraced and celebrated forms of ministry, because we've all got gifts and talents. It still does seem very much the parish ministry is seem to be the sole route. And people continue to ask me when I'm going to apply to be a parish minister, and I say, well, I feel my calling is actually to encourage the church and question the church in its missional approach to things. So yes, I'm currently the pioneer and new housing coordinator for Lothian Presbytery.
But we're all still waiting for you to get a real job.
Exactly.
That's something that I've been interested in for a while, is that England seems to be a bit ahead of Scotland in terms of pioneering and that kind of vision. Am I right in that, or is that a mixed view?
And I'm struggling because there's a train going past. I beg your pardon. I forgot that might happen.
No problem.
There's a train. There's still trains in this part of the world. I recognise that part. It's a train. So the trains. David, do you want to say that? Ask that again.
My impression has been that south of the border has been ahead of us in terms of pioneering and fresh expressions and recognising other ministries. Is that the right impression I've got, or am I mixed up?
That was certainly the case for us in Cambridgeshire, where ministry was a shared calling, and which the minister, the priest, the vicar was part of a team, and team was very much the language that was seen to be gospel, seen to be what we did. And with that, there were the acknowledgement of the weakness of the church and the facing of financial weakness and numerical weakness, and saying, there became more and more voices that said we need to complement traditional church, we need to find new ways alongside that to address these weaknesses, so that the gospel may be heard afresh for a new generation. Look how our church is aging. And so, yes, we had about 90 fresh expressions in Ely Diocese when I left, and we were affirming people as youth ministers, and just change of terminology and language like that was important. So yeah, it's in a different place. It's in a different structure, the Church of England, obviously, and a different history. But it's a different landscape.
A conversation I had with a friend a while back, he wondered whether it's fair asking old traditional churches, say your average age is 70 plus, he wondered how fair it is asking them to now become something brand new. And he also wondered whether we should almost let them be and do new things alongside. You got any feeling on that?
I've got mixed responses on that, David. I kind of feel that we're as young as we are in our mindset. When I look at the Bible and the number of teenagers that God asked to do things, dramatic things, and the number of people in the retirement or older folks who God asked preposterous things of. It's usually middle-aged that seem to have, I struggle to see them in the Bible, to be honest, But so God really has a calling on the lives of older folks. And there's a great book by Richard Rohr about the Live Upward something, about just the second half of life and how much more spiritual we are as we've done all the running around, and actually let's deepen our identity and share our gifts and encourage others. So I do acknowledge that, yes, after years of conditioning, how can we expect people to suddenly dramatically change their behavior? And yet, can't we also say, look, if you can't physically do this, you've got time, you've got stories, you've got resources, you've got money. Why not enable others more, liberate others with the creativity and the resources that you have got? So, yeah, I think probably both in that would be the answer to that question, David.
Thank you. I think as well, with your experience, I wondered, do you have a feeling where we are needing to go as a church? And I suppose I'm thinking mainly Church of Scotland, but where should we be heading? And I suppose mixed with that is, someone described to me that where we are right now in the middle of coronavirus is almost like being allowed to start again. So I wondered if you have an idea about that, starting from where we are and where do we need to go?
This is a strange time. I think wilderness and bewildering is my weekly analogy. For this week, maybe last week it was roller coaster, but well, you and me are getting to the age where I'm certain, I speak for myself as an oldie, roller coaster doesn't do much for me. But actually, this is a bewildering time, and yet it's a time that we've left our buildings, and so we have moved on. And I hope that we can take learning from this time, both as Christians and human beings, that can be good for our community and for our planet, our networks of care, our attention to what's around us. There's a whole host of things that can be really positive going forward for the church and for our society. I long in the church to see more diversity, David, more expressions of God's voice for justice and for creativity. There's still, in my book, too many churches that just try and be the same as the church down the road. And I just think we're Christians. You look back in history and just how diverse the Christian movement's been. The chance now to kind of be particular and say our calling is to do this, and we are looking to cherish the scriptures and to pray, but we express ourselves in a particular way, and I'd love to see more particularity, listening to context and with a heart for a brokenheartedness for those around us that lead us into new creativity. And I hope that this difficult period as it is, that kind of the seeds of that might be planted, and that we don't just press the reset button. That's my fear. We at our computers, we so often press the reset button. I think that there are lessons in this hard time, bewildering as it is for all of us, that we can move forward from and not move back.
Interesting. One of the things I've been speaking to people about in these interviews has been the response to online church. I've seen quite a lot of mixed responses. I've seen quite a lot of anxiety about, can we do communion, this kind of stuff. And also, I've seen quite a lot of, myself included, quite a lot of us are recreating what we do anyway, but in a completely different context. And do you have any thoughts on that kind of the direction of travel with that?
Again, as you said, it's a mixed one on that, because it's wonderful, the accessibility. What we're finding is that people's spouse, often husbands, are sitting with their wives. They don't have the cringe factor of crossing the threshold in this miserable, damp old building, and with these fuddy-duddies, actually, whatever, sorry, that's a patronizing thing to say, but, just the chance to participate maybe not even be on the video, because we're doing Zoom, so that accessibility is wonderful. What worries me is the consumerist side of things, whereas, people were telling me, I've been 5 services today, which means you skim through just a few seconds here and a few seconds there. And actually, if we're called to follow Jesus Christ, and if we're to work that out in fear and trembling, we've got an awful lot more work to do with our discipleship in our relationship with God than simply watching. However, again, I'm excited by the creativity, the looking, and the visuals that are given much more prominence at this time. To look around us and to be visual and to invite participation and contributions from a variety of folk. I hope it's a chance for techie folk to be affirmed, and the minister not to try everything, David. Like you and me we're beating ourselves up and we are learning stuff, and that's good for us. But yet, some of the teenagers or 20-somethings, they should be the ones who could, they might be looking for their role in the gifts of Ephesians 4 and sort of say, that's where I am, in that old ministry, because I think it's great to affirm those young people at this and let them lead us and see what they see, with their phones or whatever it is,
Do you have a feeling on that the shift maybe from consumers to disciples seems to be really important? How on earth do we encourage that shift in churches? Because even churches which you would consider very healthy, one might consider very healthy, very spiritually switched on, there still seems to be quite a consumer approach.
We love stimulation. Come on, stimulate me intellectually, stimulate me emotionally, move me spiritually. As a deer cries for water. There's that thirst, that engagement, that desire for God that that will want visual, that will want emotional, that will want all of life. It's our job to work that out in our localities in ways that express themselves in new forms of service and prayer and seeing God in action. It will be the evidence of that happening.
And do you think what we're going through just now can teach us anything specifically? I don't so much mean God is doing something to us just now, but what can we learn from coronavirus lockdown about ourselves and about what we've done with church?
Noticing. I just inviting people to see what they notice around them and to bring that into worship. I think also that we're not a church that doesn't have to be dependent on buildings. We meet and we pray together, maybe more regularly now than we have been. We have to ask ourselves hard questions. All this is causing us to do that, which is good. The awkwardness of this can be of benefit to us. Who are we not in touch with? What are the platforms young people are using? What other agencies in the community are we working with in partnership? Maybe not leading on, but do we have the humility to go with them at this time? Pennycook, there's ambassadors, and the community council and ourselves are working on that. We're not taking the lead, though, and we're not just doing. There are networks of care within the church, but really, in addition to that, we're trying to coordinate stuff with Pennycook, but we're not leading on that. Sometimes the church, we've always felt, and it's good to be doing these things, but not always sometimes being the guest, not the host, is important. And that's maybe where we are in this culture, to have that humility as well, David.
Yeah, I wonder I can't remember the name of the book, but I read a book, I think by an Anglican priest from a while back, about this being a time of exile. And not coronavirus, actually just in general, the church's context has been exile. And I've heard, I know you'll be spending some time with Graham Duffin in the Lothians. He's talked often about the church has now moved to the side rather than the centre of things, but it's where we should be.
I'm nervous. Interesting how things have changed, David. I was going to an evangelical church in Cambridge when its strapline was "Church at the heart of community," heart of the community. I have problems, to be honest, with that these days because I'm not quite sure if you can say the community in such a who you're speaking to when you use that language. We have a variety of communities. I'm not saying that in a way that I'm delighted or grateful for. I'm just questioning how many people hold the big picture and whose picture we're holding. And then to be at the heart of that, is that us saying that we have to be there or we are the only ones? One of the celebrations that we have at this time is to recognize that God loves everyone and everything that God's made as we look around us in the ordinariness and the peculiarity and the overfamiliarity of the settings that God has given us for just now. So I think, there's a time back in the 1980s, 1990s with liberation theology and being on the margins was very much spoken about. And I do still think that that's gospel. When I look at the people that Jesus spent time with, remarkably unpowerful people, remarkably strange and on the edge people, and from the groups like that, there emerges a radical community of sharing and of kingdom values that is breathtaking. So it's a very interesting observation about where the church places itself in its local community and how it sees itself leading, partnering, how much is spent with the pastoral care of its internal needs, and how much spare capacity or is there, how much energy is there to do mission if we're doing so much pastoral caring. And it's right that we need to. It's a difficult call at times in that, but we need to certainly liberate and let free those that have the vision and the energy to do stuff with younger people, for goodness sake.
I'm interested to ask about that. That you've mentioned calling and how have you managed to stick to your guns, as it were? How have you managed to say, I want to do a certain type of ministry, I'm called to that certain type of ministry, when everything is pushing towards a different shape? How do you do that?
There's a stubbornness. It's a sense of calling. It is a sense that this is where God has taken me to, and that desire for the big. We need to have a strategy at this time. We need to look strategically at where we are and our place as churches and as people. What matters? What really matters? And how do we have a response, a worked out response to that? We need to be first order people. First order questions need to trouble us, inspire us. Now, maybe that's a personality type I find easier than others, but I do think at this time where we are a global village, the church needs to hold on to that big picture. I'm a little bit concerned in our Presbyterian system who does that, where that happens. And it's very tempting to reduce ourselves down into being a club. But I feel that is not what the church is called to be. It never has been. And we need to be about the kingdom and need to be about the soul of the nation, about the planet, for goodness sake, David. Look at the state of where things are at, But it's not easy. I found that, again, my role came up and say, should we furlough Peter? Is mission just something we can furlough, Really, what is life? Where's the future? What are we committed to? Is it the future? Is it about what God's doing and taking risks, or is it about something less than that?
You're leading me to places that I want to go, which is great, because you mentioned creativity, and you also mentioned earlier on the lack of resource, and how something I'm concerned about, and something as a church, I suppose the Church of Scotland is struggling with, is when we feel threatened and at risk, whether it's financially or structurally, there's a choice to make of being creative and risk taking or not. And I'm not going to ask you to comment on what you think we are doing, but how do we develop a risk taking and creative culture?
I think we first of all need to look back and note the changes that have already happened. Because sometimes we tend to think that nothing has changed. Now I'm not supporting a status quo, but I do think for people who find change difficult, to point out the changes that have happened in the church and that happen and are happening in the world around us. One of the most fascinating documentaries I saw recently was the one that David Attenborough did about the cities of the world, where the changing behavior of animals. So birds no longer fly back from Spain to Africa. They're now staying the whole year in Spain. We were taught, you and me, about birds migrate. Actually, they don't. Things are changing. There's great crested newts are having their babies in plastic bags. Watch the program. It's amazing. These are changes that animals are making. So therefore, we need adapting is what we do as human beings. And so therefore, looking for what God's calling us into has always been what our calling is. Sometimes it's abrupt, as it is at the moment. Sometimes it's looking at the opportunity, but we need to be about sharing the love of Christ through service and through evangelism and through mission. And so going where that leads us and pushing the doors of celebration, of innovation, that's what I believe that we're called to be.
I was speaking to David McCarthy recently, who you've come across, and when speaking about where he thought the church should go or might go, what I realised was that the way he dealt with the question was completely different from how I had anticipated, because I am so blinkered by parish ministry now that I think of change in terms of what the service and the liturgy might look like. And his answer didn't deal with that at all, and yet went to the core of church. And I suppose I'm wondering, how does someone who is in parish ministry, who recognises the need for change, how do I deal with the fact that most of my time is taken up with propping up something that we've been doing for a long time, propping up the services. And when I think innovatively, most of the innovation is to how do we change the church service. And yet I get the impression from what you're saying that there's a much bigger picture of change.
There's a few things there, David. I mean, we believe in mixed economy. We believe in a blended economy in which we celebrate where God is at work in traditional structures and settings, and there are some fabulous examples of that. We look, however, to where God's leading us into the future, and we discern together on that, and we look for God's leading into that. So I think that our greatest joy, often as ministers, I don't know about you, but my greatest joy is when I see somebody stepping into a new role, and I no longer have to do it. They've got the DNA of our church, and things start happening. Our role as ministers is to hold that apostle role in terms of the bigger picture. Now, you might say, well, what is my gift as a minister? I've been trained as a pastoral minister, and maybe that is what your calling is. Again, I would say a team really is so important in all what you're saying. It's fundamental so that we can see, because only in a team can we see clearly what the picture is. And we appreciate each other, and we help our blind spots, and we enable different ministries, and we work out and say, no, this is what you're called, and we affirm each other in that. So I think only in a team ministry situation can we probably manage to do a mixed economy in which we can have a community that's got a care and a quality of care that cares for the vulnerable. And if we're not doing that, we're not probably a Christian community. And yet a community that cares for the vulnerable in Christ and those that don't know Christ. And that's a missional heart. And people will be in different places in that community to sit with those people. And that won't be everybody. So again, it comes back around to being a community in which everyone plays their part and feels empowered in that. That means us as ministers giving away some of our power and not colluding with people and saying, no, you want me to do this and I'll do that. Actually, is it all about the sermon? No, it's not. It's about gathering as a Christian community and telling our stories together. When you gather on a Sunday, what have you seen of God this week? What glimpses of the kingdom have you, before we sing this hymn, it's that degree of sharing. Dare you tell the person next to you what you think God might have said to you this week? Or even this time of lockdown, there's something in your garden, your tomatoes. What are they saying to you about God's patterns for creation and God's love of color and fruitfulness? Maybe so that creativity, that sharing, is my joy for Christian. Can I believe that we're called to live in Christian community? And I long to see more of it and more diverse forms of it. And probably, David, smaller Christian communities. I think we will likely, it's going to be difficult, especially at the moment where churches that have got the machinery and the mechanisms and the clever people and the wealthy people will apparently do better with all the streaming and stuff. But what about the particularity of context and calling? And I do love to see more diverse, smaller Christian communities.
That feels scary to someone who's used to a degree of control.
Sure.
Diversity and a degree of pushing out or pushing down power can be frightening. Yes, I can't deny that. But Philippians 2, Jesus came. We believe in a self-giving. For me, theologically, the most helpful definition that's probably very straightforward as well is, I believe in worship, a self-giving God. It's such a helpful, for me, giving in Jesus Christ, giving in the Holy Spirit, giving God's image to each one of us, giving the color and the beauty to our world. We believe and follow a self-giving God, which again is all about interconnectedness, not just on the internet, but as human beings and as human beings sharing the planet. This is going to come slightly out of left field now, but a question that I've been asking some of the people I've chatted with has been to do with personal spirituality, and my experience as a minister is that, in fact, I think I was saying this to my wife this morning, that I feel that I was probably more spiritually engaged with God before ever studying theology than I've become as someone who becomes a professional Christian. Do you have any tips for people on how to maintain some kind of vital Christianity and Christian reality in their faith?
we've been talking about Christian community, and it's got to be in a small group of people where you can be radically honest and say, you know what, I struggle with this. It's not exciting me. It's going to happen, isn't it, David? I mean, having read, the same passages year after year, there's going to be a dulling. And yet we believe that God speaks through his word, through each other, in creation, in ways that are startlingly fresh. So I do think that the small groupings that people affirm each other and hold each other to account are so important so that we can remain Christians that worship in spirit and in truth. I think we've got to work out a pattern to our days and lives. Certainly at the moment, trying to make sense of this endless time. Which day of the week? Is this a Wednesday? It's Wednesday, isn't it? It's that kind of question.
Just have to check. Yes.
But I do think that when your role coincides with your faith, it's a huge challenge for us to be the minister or to be yourself. Really healthy when you change jobs or you take a sabbatical and people don't know you. It's such a good, humbling, gracious thing to work out again who you're called by and to and who you are before you start talking about our church. Actually, what about you, David? What's God been saying to you? It's challenging. It's hugely challenging, David. It's a privilege, but hugely challenging.
Some of the Fresh Expressions movements have connected with monastic patterns and rhythms and things like that. Is that something you've been involved in or come across?
Just today, I encourage you, the Northumbria community have got some great little videos around on that. Looking particularly at this time can be particularly helpful, the monastic pattern, the fivefold pattern, because they are in retreat. They are, this is a time, you ever felt like being a monk? It's a good time now to check it out. Go to your cell, so there's something imprisoning about that, and the structure of some of that monastic living can be really helpful. Alongside that, I find that helpful, but I'm outside, and that's why I sat outside, because I'm really interested in Forest Church, and I myself, I'm looking, we've got a couple of Forest churches that are embryonic in Lothian, and I just think if I'm taking people to an encounter with God, I'd sort of start outside and just sort of ask that, I wonder, do you notice? Isn't that beautiful? Do you think this is all by accident? Why do you like that? Just what's this telling us? Just in the quiet, listening to the birds. Is that God's voice? Is that it's just beautiful? And for myself, David, spiritually, I find that refreshing and invigorating, and classic for us in the Lothians, where John Muir comes from, to sort of why talk about God? Why talk about God's creation in a church? Why not be in the creation and talk about what it means to be church outside?
I think that'll be a new concept to some folk. Forest Church, is it a movement or is it something quite new?
It is a movement that's been going for about 10 years across the UK. Forest churches are popping up in many different places. It's a movement, so there's different forms of Forest Church. Sometimes they are like Messy Church, doing activities with young families and children and grandparents outside. Sometimes there is Mountain Pilgrims, for example, in Penrith, a bunch of blokes that go off for a day's walking. And that's what they do. They walk, and then maybe at lunchtime they just have half an hour just standing, looking at where they come from in silence. And they briefly share what they've been thinking, what they've noticed, and pray, and then walk on. And that's what they do. We had a day in Lothian back in February, where 75 people came to just be curious about what this might mean. And we did a bit of worship outside, but we took the Christmas trees from our houses and we burnt them, and we brought the light of Christmas into the rest of the year. And we said some words as we did that. We thought what was a lighting in our lives as we put the Christmas trees on the fire, and we sang and we faced different directions. And this is in Lone Head. We even did this. So come on, if Lone Head can do Forest Church, it's not something it's for the great parts of our country, but just being outside. We're going to do it down on the beach in Musselburgh. We're going to do it in different places in Pennycook. But if you want to find out more, please get in touch.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant book by Bruce Stanley on Forest Church, which is the book to get. It's so encouraging. It's so easy to read. It's practical. It's theological. I think in Scotland particularly, I'd love to see. And the Covenanters, David. The Covenant, where did they meet? They prayed on the hillsides.
Yeah.
So hey, this is what we do as Presbyterians. We can discover what it means to be Presbyterian, praying outside. Come on.
I'm really fascinated by that. I studied geography a long, long time ago, and one of the essay questions set for the course was saying that the roots of the environmental crisis are 2,000 years old, and I think there was a hint there that basically Christian thought is behind environmental degradation.
The Protestant work ethic.
But it's interesting to hear of a Christian spirituality that is re-engaging with nature without becoming pagan.
Well, this is it. I have to say the Forest Church movement have got more engagement with Druids and others because they are saying we don't have to start by saying get your Bibles out.
Yeah.
We start with the first book of creation and look, and we give thanks to God for God's creation. So yes, there might be a group in the country that's a Forest Church that's a bit more on one scale of things, but it is fascinating, the engagement and the spiritual engagement. I do think people in these different environmentalists or tree hugging or whatever you want to call it are looking for some connections with nature.
Yeah.
And our place in it, which we seem to have lost. When likes of you and me organise a harvest service and we ask the kids, where's this come from? They go, Tesco. You go, oh, no. It's from beyond the supermarket. Where does this come from? How do you grow this? But we just get so domesticated and so tarmacked that we kind of just have lost sight of the earth under our feet and our relationship with that earth. You go back to our grandparents, just their working of the land. Both my grandparents are fishermen, and I find it fascinating their calling on their lives to live that way and what that meant and what they appreciated because of that. Again, that's for us as Scots.
It's fascinating how it might connect with Steve Aithorpe's stuff on people who are external to the Christian community but worshipping. I'm sure you've come across as many people as I who would say I feel a lot closer to God in the hills than I do in any church.
Absolutely. There's a group not far from here where they care for the land, they plant crops, they sit and have barbecue and they sing together. They're not Christians. They're not pagans, and they're not quite sure what they are. But it's fascinating that this is what they're doing. They're close to living a community life on a piece of land because they cherish it and they enjoy it, and it's their place to go to. All this is within touching distance of holiness, of special sacred places, of community. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I guess there'd be an apprehension with some of that because it sounds very New Age, and yet at the same time it sounds very Old Testament to me.
Exactly. Bushes that don't go out. So much of Jesus' ministry was outside.
Yeah.
So much of it was outside. Barbecues outside, boats outside, turning over temple. So little of it was in synagogues. So little of it. And so look at the lilies of the field. Look at your tomatoes in your greenhouse. Jesus' language is full of nature, and we have worked that into creeds and I've forgotten maybe where the source of those things, those observations and noticing have come from. So we really need to reconnect with them.
Wow, yeah,
certainly.
We've been studying Mark's Gospel as a church, and every time I'm struck by how often Jesus tries to escape to the wilderness.
Absolutely, indeed, yeah.
This has been fascinating, and I'm enjoying the re-earthing or regrounding our faith. I think we need to pause in case we get cut off mid-sentence because I want to thank you very, very much for your time today.
Not at all. It's a joy to speak with you and to be. We've got far from getting things sorted. The church, the communities I'm involved with, we are embryonic. But we need to ask ourselves harder questions. We need to seek after God and get outside and be church.
Thank you very, very much, Peter.